when I was chatting with Diane before we got started here, she said, nobody wants to hear from me. They're here to hear other folks. And anyway, I want to say thank you to Diane for taking the initiative as a citizen under our Constitution to organize other people and teach people about the Constitution and what it means and what we're in danger of losing. And can I help you at all, sir? You look a little lost.
I was hoping that I might address this body. I have some experience in these types of assemblies. And I was a member of the 1787 Constitution, James Madison. And some people consider me a father of the Constitution that created the United States.
Madam Chair, are you okay? Mr. Madison, please. Now, you promised, though, to tell the parts of the New Hampshire Constitution that you borrowed from heavily in writing your U.S. Constitution.
Definitely. Thank you for allowing me to come before this convention. But first, I must ask, am I before friends of the 1787 Constitution?
Yeah.
And if so, what is the impetus for amending it? In my generation, there were major problems that we were facing that the Articles of Confederation were inadequate for. In fact, it placed restrictions upon Congress in changing the form of government that were its own Achilles heel. Though it saw us through the war for independence, it was too feeble to hold the states in union. It was too feeble to provide for the true security of the people. In fact, it placed all three powers of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, into one set of hands, the Congress. If it had not been so feeble, it would have been ripe for tyranny. This was our impetus for establishing the American Republic. Certainly, you do not face that kind of oppression now, for you, the people, are the government, and certainly you would not oppress yourselves. And even if you should so desire, under the Constitution, you have no power to repress the civil liberties of your neighbor.
Most Honorable James Madison, we do not meet here to amend or replace the 1787 Constitution. We gather here this evening to honor your work and that of your colleagues, to honor their genius and their purity of motive. We are most honored with your interest and your presence this evening.
But I am certain, sir, that my sources are all too accurate for me to be mistaken. They have informed me of a movement among the states to hold a convention of the states to make changes to the Constitution, though I may be in the wrong place. What can you tell me of this convention?
If I may, Mr. Madison, I have recently attended an assembly of states that took place in Indianapolis, Indiana, just this summer, where some 26 states
Just leave it. I'll just stay with you.
either elected or appointed or of their own volition who attended. It is true, sir, that according to the genius of the Constitution that you and your colleagues helped draft, we, the people, are the government. There is no question about that. The problem is that the majority of the people do not know it. They do not know that they, through the founding documents, are the government. They have fallen asleep. They have forgotten because of a government-controlled public education system. The majority of the people in this country have been orphaned from their roots in the American Republic. In a word, sir, the people of this great land have been made ignorant. The citizens today lack the knowledge, the information. They are not aware of the principles upon which American freedom and personal liberty is wrested. We, the people, are treated like subjects. Subjects of the crown, of the government, rather than as the rightful owners of the government. The people, the government operating in Washington, D.C. is not, sir, the limited government which you created. Our elected officials do not adhere to the principles and the limitations placed upon them by the 1787 Convention and Constitution. They are controlled by factions seeking wealth and power. They are bound together, these factions, by self-serving interests. America's two-party system has corrupted the Constitution, and we now operate more as a democracy than as a constitutional republic bounded by the rule of law.
Surely, sir, there must be some hyperbole in what you say. The Constitution is designed to protect the people from the avariceness of the self-serving. It contains checks and balances, a positive separation of powers in recognition of the oppression that the people suffered under during the war years leading up to the War for Independence. Surely the people have not forgotten the great sacrifices that my generation made. We paid a dear price to secure for our posterity their liberty. Tyranny and oppression were present throughout the land. The king and parliament had erected a multitude of offices to harass the people and eat out their substance.
Sir, there is little difference today between the national government and its operation and your time. There are many transgressions we could discuss, many of which you would find very, very familiar. For all three branches of the national government today ignore the limitations placed upon them. They openly trample upon the rights of the people and the rights specifically enumerated in the 9th and the 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights. Federalism, sir, is all but dead. The government you created under the Constitution to be neither wholly federal nor wholly national is ignored. It has given way to an overreaching, insidious, national general government. It is no longer the limited government with limited authority. Its reach no longer stops at the state borders. With the rise of an administrative state, the administrative portion of the government reaches across state lines, into the states themselves, into the counties within the states, into the towns within the counties, and it stops there. It does not stop there. It goes into the communities within the towns, and it goes even further into the churches and into the family. The concept of a government, a limited self-governance, is all but gone from this great land.
What is this administrative state of which you speak? The Constitution gives the legislative body a mere 18 to 20 powers, and the executive has only approximately 6 areas of jurisdiction. Without the express written will of the people, enlarging those powers by amending the Constitution, how can something of the nature which you describe, this administrative state, arise as an institution when the Constitution erects no such entity?
Sir, the Constitution has been interpreted to establish such an entity. The right of the Congress has been replaced by a Congress which has created independent agencies and independent regulatory boards, each of which creates its own laws and rules. These agencies are the handiwork of a century of a corrupt Congress that has been too lazy to do the work And, sir, they do this out of the public eye. They do it within the realms of executive authority or the realms of good governance. Congress has justified the creation of this administrative state, claiming that their services were more needed to handle the complex deals of government, and that they could not deal with the individual activities taking place. They are a threat, a clear and present danger to the people's right to control and make government accountable to them. You, sir, saw that in our own New Hampshire Constitution and included that in the U.S. Constitution. These administrative agencies force the people to live under and be governed by laws and worse, rules that are not made by the people through their elected representatives. These agencies and boards are accorded rule-making authority, and with that rule, they enforce the equivalency of law.
I find what you say to be an incredible violation of the non-delegation doctrine. The social contract philosophy of John Locke greatly influenced Mr. Jefferson in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And we were well aware of it in Philadelphia when we wrote the Constitution, in the development of the American Republic. And I noticed here in what appears to be an agenda for your meeting of some sort, that you've made note of it right here. Let me read it to you. The legislative cannot transfer the power of making law into any other hands. For it being but a delegated power from the people, they who have it cannot pass it on to others. And when the people have said, we will submit to rules and be governed by laws made by such men and in such forms, nobody else can say, other men shall make laws, such as are enacted by those whom are authorized to make law for them. The legislative, being derived from the people by a positive, voluntary grant and institution, can be no other than what the positive grant conveyed, which being only to make laws and not to make legislators, to transfer their authority of making laws and place it in other hands that they have chosen. This, sir, is what we gave you.
Sir, as I said earlier, this nation has been made ignorant. Perhaps you should and could, I know you can, expound upon this Lockean theory of non-delegation and instruct us as to how this is connected to the Constitution.
Well, the Constitution, as we wrote it, and as the people of the founding era understood it, imposes a structural separation of powers. Now, as I said, there was no such separation in the Articles of Confederation. But we looked at the constitutions of the states, in particular, the state of New Hampshire. For in your Bill of Rights, you said it best, that the three powers of government, to wit, legislative, executive, and judicial, ought to be as separate from and independent of each other as the nature of free government will admit. Recognizing that there must be checks and balances, not a complete separation. It must contain partial agency so that no branch can run away with the show. And while the words non-delegation are not expressly included in the text of the instrument, it is included explicitly and implicitly in any and all written constitutions that contain a structural separation of powers. That is why we wrote it the way we did. you all appear to have something that looks like a translation or a presentation of the Constitution before you. Let's just look at Article 1, Section 1. The first operative words of the document. Article 1, Section 1. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall be comprised of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Not all, not some, not most, all legislative power. There is none left over for the executive or the judiciary. How is it, sir, that the people do not rise up in protest of this most flagrant violation of their rights? How do the people accept this travesty of this administrative state which has been perpetrated upon them by their elected officials, absent of any true authority for it to exist under the Constitution?
Sir, again, it is the administrative state. You see, the state's right to oversee the education of its citizens has been hijacked by an independent agency created for good governance. This agency is called the Department of Education. The nameless and faceless bureaucrats in that agency fill out its rank and file and now control, sir, what is taught in America's classrooms, even in the local school, and even in religious schools to a large degree. Under their administration, people have been made ignorant of their roots, and I stress that, sir. They have been made ignorant of their roots in the American Republic. Oftentimes, the textbooks used to teach American youth neglect to include their heritage. They vilify, sir, the genius of the Constitution and the men who framed it. You see, the impetus behind the state constitution, the call for a state constitutional convention for the purpose of amending the Constitution of the United States, is to gain control, I stress that, gain control of our runaway government. We find ourselves unable to rein in the national government, which, as you know, from personal contact, is exactly what Patrick Henry said would happen. One other point, which is yet to surface in our dialogue, is the runaway spending which has taken place in this country. I see from your expression that term bothers you severely. The national government proposes to spend $4 trillion next year. Oh, you look shocked, sir. Over half the people derive their living from the national government. Currently, our national debt, what we owe to the citizens of the United States, to the citizens of foreign countries, and to foreign nations themselves, is approaching $18 trillion. The average share of every man, woman, and child of that debt in this country is in excess of $58,000. So you see, sir, there is the need for a convention, an assembly of the states to propose amendments to the Constitution, a balanced budget amendment, which was included in the Constitution.
I recognize the constitutional crisis as you set it forth, and I empathize with the situation, and I guess I share your urgency in wishing to take action. And though Article 5 does provide for a convention of the states, I must share with you that it was not part of my original draft. It was itself an amendment, which I did not endorse. And I question its efficacy in remedying the problems that you raised today. First, I don't see why 2/3 of the states could not simply meet in assembly, determine an adequate amendment, and present it to the Congress for them to consider it.
Mr. Madison, something similar to what you're suggesting happened about 100 years ago in 1913, when a group of people called progressives were in power, and they decided that they were going to take away the method of electing senators, away from what the Constitution told us we should do it, through the state's legislatures into a popular vote. They created what was called the 17th Amendment of the Constitution, creating, therefore, a direct vote from the people to elect senators and taking away the power of the states. And we have been at the whims of the national government ever since. So, Mr. Madison, you have to be careful what you wish for when you call for an Article 5 convention.
Now I do understand how it was made possible for this institution, this administrative state, to infiltrate your government. Your people, in approving this radical change, destroyed federalism. They removed that bulwark of the state. They took away the state's representation in our government, removing the layer of protection needed to stop an overreach of the national government. But let's return to the convention. The text of Article 5, I have always doubted it for vagueness. What is meant? Call a convention for the purpose. How great a purpose? What purpose constitutes sufficient cause? The convention itself. How is it to be formed? How will the delegates be chosen? How many delegates will each state have? Will they vote singly or as a state? How will the rules be decided? By rights? It ought to be by the convention itself. But will Congress usurp that role?
Thank you for the opportunity. As I said earlier, I had attended a session in Indianapolis, Indiana, where many states were present. Let me address each one of these points that you bring up individually. The call of the convention is for, as it states in your document, sir, the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Not to change the Constitution, but to propose amendments to the Constitution. They would then go back to the states for ratification by 3/4 before becoming part of the bedrock law of the land. That is what the call is. How will the convention be formed? Well, that's up to the states. It's the people who would be going, which would be designated by the states, either by appointment by the legislature or by open election for the position, as the states themselves may declare. And you talk about how many votes the individuals would have when they get there. This today is still an issue, as it was when you wrote the document. We voted in Indianapolis, this assembly, this nascent assembly of states, to allow one vote per state, regardless of the number of delegates that go forward. One vote per state to determine how we operate. And each one of those states has already adopted some basic rules. Mason's rules would be the bedrock governing law for all deliberations that took place. And then individual rules of the assembly would be voted on by the individuals there. As for stopping Congress, there is no rule that allows Congress to set the regulations as to how an assembly would take place. Indeed, sir, as you suggested earlier, when 25, 26, or 27, or 30 states agree on something, Washington, D.C. must take notice, for they know that they have overstepped their reach at that point, and in doing so are in danger of losing the very power they crave. That, sir, is why an assembly of the states can restrict the great Leviathan.
It comforts me that you have indeed considered the points I brought forth, though I am concerned that without adequate planning you will be able to force the situation. Even more so is the urgency of the economic situation which you described. It appears in its nature to be so immediate that I doubt that amendments to the Constitution could be contrived, adopted, ratified, and acted upon in adequate time. Each one of these steps could take a year or two or more. I believe it requires a more immediate remedy. Should your economy collapse, when it collapses, $18 trillion in debt, that's beyond my imagination. How will you maintain order and provide for the security of the people? Does your state still maintain a well-regulated militia as it ought?
We have a well-regulated National Guard, over 4,000 persons. Over 4,000. That's our National Guard.
The militia is comprised of the adult males of the community. In my day, New Hampshire had a militia of, well, the first order. The training band was 20,000 and the alarm list equal. What disaster has fallen upon New Hampshire that its population has fallen to only 10,000?
No, sir, no, sir. The population of New Hampshire is 1.3 million, sir. But the nature of the militia has drastically changed.
God help you all. Regardless of the reasons that I've set forth, I would not suggest an Article 5 convention of the states. I would suggest that your time would be better spent teaching your people how to enforce the Constitution that you already have. As I told the members of the Virginia Ratification Convention, I go on this great Republican principle. The people will have the virtue and intelligence to elect men of virtue and wisdom. If there is no virtue among the people, if there be not, you are in a wretched situation. No theoretical checks, no form of government can render you secure. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty and happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. To put it simply, if the Congress is lazy, selfish, and corrupt, it can only mean that the people themselves and the state legislatures are lazy, selfish, and corrupt. For the legislative bodies can only be a mirror image of the people who select them. Thank you for allowing me to address this assembly. It is clear to me that your generation has much work to do to reassert the liberty that my generation sacrificed so much to establish.
I'm not sure what's next on the agenda. Someone walked away with my notes. So now he borrowed from the New Hampshire Constitution to write the United States, and he borrowed from my speaker notes. All right, as you know, we recognized some folks early on. I want to recognize also a state representative and a retired Marine, Representative Alvaro Cerro of National.
Croc TV.